The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. My breath plumed in front of me as I zipped up my sleeping bag, trying to get comfortable on the surprisingly lumpy ground. It was my first time camping without my parents, just me and my best friend, Liam. We were deep in the Whispering Pines National Forest, a place known more for its hiking trails than its spooky legends, which was precisely why we'd chosen it. We wanted a real, authentic wilderness experience, not some overhyped ghost story. "You sure you don't hear anything?" Liam whispered from his tent beside mine, his voice barely audible through the thin nylon. "Just the wind, dude," I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. The wind was picking up, rustling through the tall pines that towered over our small clearing. But there was something else, too. A low, almost rhythmic thump-thump that seemed to vibrate through the ground. We'd set up camp just before dusk, cooked some terrible hot dogs over a sputtering fire, and then spent an hour telling increasingly ridiculous ghost stories. Now, in the dead of night, with the fire reduced to glowing embers, those stories felt a little less ridiculous. "It sounds like a heartbeat," Liam murmured, his voice tight. I strained my ears. He was right. It wasn't the wind. It was a deep, slow thump-thump, like something massive moving through the forest, or perhaps something massive breathing. My heart hammered against my ribs, mimicking the sound outside. "Probably just a deer," I said, though my mind was already conjuring images of something far less innocent. "A bear?" No, bears didn't make that kind of sound. And it wasn't a steady rhythm, it was irregular, like something was struggling. The thumping grew louder, closer. The ground beneath my sleeping bag seemed to tremble faintly. I could hear Liam shifting in his tent, his movements quick and nervous. "Maybe we should check it out," he suggested, his voice cracking slightly. "Are you insane?" I hissed back. "No way. We stay in the tents. Rule number 1 of camping. Don't go wandering around in the dark." "But what if it's someone in trouble?" Before I could argue, a new sound joined the thumping. A low, guttural moan. It was definitely not an animal. It was a human sound, but twisted, pained, and far too deep to be natural. My blood ran cold. The thumping stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise. The wind still whispered through the pines, but now it sounded like a chorus of hushed voices, murmuring secrets I couldn't quite decipher. Then, a twig snapped, impossibly close to my tent. I froze, every muscle in my body tensed. I could feel my eyes wide open in the darkness, staring at the translucent nylon wall, as if I could pierce through it and see whatever was out there. A shadow fell across my tent. It was huge, blocking out the faint moonlight that had been filtering through the trees. I held my breath, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. I could hear Liam's ragged breathing from his tent, just as terrified as I was. The shadow lingered, unmoving, for what felt like an eternity. I imagined a grotesque figure, twisted and ancient, standing just inches from my head. I could almost feel its breath, cold and stale, on the other side of the fabric. Then, a faint scratching sound, like fingernails dragging slowly down the side of the tent. It started near my feet and slowly, agonizingly, moved upwards, past my waist, past my chest, until it was right beside my ear. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears pricking at the corners. This wasn't a deer. This wasn't a bear. This was something else entirely. Something that knew we were here, something that was toying with us. The scratching stopped at my head. I could feel the pressure of something pressing against the tent, just above my ear. A low, raspy whisper slithered through the fabric, so close it felt like it was inside my mind. "You shouldn't be here." The words were drawn out, each syllable a struggle, as if the speaker was in immense pain, or hadn't spoken in a very long time. The voice was ancient, chilling, and filled with a profound sorrow. I whimpered, unable to hold it back. The pressure on the tent eased. The shadow receded. The scratching sound was gone. I lay there, trembling, for what felt like hours. I didn't dare open my eyes. I didn't dare move. Eventually, the first faint hint of dawn began to lighten the sky, casting a pale, ghostly glow through the trees. When I finally mustered the courage to unzip my tent, Liam was already outside, pale and wide-eyed, staring at the spot where the shadow had been. Did you hear it?" he croaked, his voice hoarse. I nodded, unable to speak. We packed up our camp in a frantic, silent blur, not even bothering with breakfast. We didn't look back as we hiked out of the whispering pines, the wind still rustling through the trees, carrying with it the faint, lingering echo of that ancient, sorrowful whisper. We never went camping again. The lake shimmered under the late afternoon sun, a perfect mirror reflecting the towering evergreens that ringed its shores. This was it, Lake Serenity. My dad used to bring me here when I was little, telling me stories about the old logging camps and the mysterious disappearances that were just local folklore. Now, at 16, I was here with my older cousin, Alex, determined to prove those old tales were just that, tales. Seriously, Mark? You're still thinking about those old stories? Alex chuckled, tossing another log onto the burgeoning campfire. Sparks flew, dancing against the deepening twilight. It's just a lake, a really pretty one. I shrugged, pretending to be nonchalant. Just saying it's pretty isolated. No cell service, no other campers for miles. We'd hiked in almost 5 miles, leaving the main trail far behind. Our little clearing, nestled right on the water's edge, felt utterly cut off from the world. As darkness truly settled, the stars began to pop out, one by one, until the sky was a velvet blanket studded with diamonds. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the forest intensified. The chirping of crickets, the hoot of an owl, the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. We ate our freeze-dried meals, told some jokes, and then settled into our sleeping bags inside our 2-person tent. The fire outside crackled, a comforting presence. "Night, Alex," I mumbled, pulling my sleeping bag up to my chin. "Night, little cousin," he replied, already drifting off. I, however, couldn't sleep. Every rustle of leaves, every distant snap of a twig, seemed amplified in the quiet darkness. My mind kept replaying Dad's old stories. The one about the lost hiker who was found years later, perfectly preserved but with a look of pure terror frozen on his face. The one about the logging crew that vanished overnight, leaving their tools behind. Then I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible click. It sounded like a camera shutter. I held my breath, straining my ears. Nothing. Just the usual night sounds. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of the wind. A few minutes later, another click. This time it was closer. It sounded like it was coming from outside the tent, just a few feet away. My heart began to thump. I slowly, carefully, reached for my flashlight, my hand trembling slightly. I clicked it on, pointing the beam at the tent wall, hoping to see a shadow, anything that would explain the sound. Nothing. I lay there, rigid, for what felt like an hour. The clicks didn't come again. I was just about to convince myself it was a dream when I heard a new sound. A faint, almost inaudible whirring, like a tiny motor. It was rhythmic, steady, and it seemed to be circling our tent. Panic began to set in. What kind of animal made a whirring sound like that? And why was it circling us? I nudged Alex with my foot. "Alex," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. He stirred. "Huh? What is it? Do you hear that?" He listened for a moment. "Hear what?" "The crickets." "No, that whirring. It's outside." He listened again. "Nah, man. You're just spooked. Go to sleep." He rolled over, his breathing evening out. I was alone with the sound. The whirring continued, a constant, unnerving presence just outside our thin nylon barrier. It seemed to pause directly outside my head, then move on, slowly completing its circuit around the tent. I imagined a drone, hovering silently, its camera lens pointed directly at me. But who would be out here? And why? The thought was almost more unsettling than a monster. Person watching us. The whirring stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. I felt an intense, undeniable sensation of being watched. Not just a feeling, but a physical weight like invisible eyes were boring into me. I slowly, cautiously, unzipped the tent flap just a crack, peering out into the darkness. The campfire had died down to a few glowing embers, casting long, dancing shadows. The trees loomed, dark and silent. And then I saw it, or rather, I felt it, a flicker of movement at the very edge of the clearing, where the trees were thickest. Something tall, slender, and impossibly still. It wasn't moving, but I could feel its gaze. It was just a deeper shadow among shadows, but I knew it was there, watching. I quickly zipped the tent shut, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the zipper. I scrambled back into my sleeping bag, pulling it over my head, trying to block out the image, the feeling. I stayed like that until the first hint of dawn. When the sky began to lighten, the oppressive feeling of being watched slowly lifted. I waited until the sun was fully up, painting the lake in shades of gold and pink, before I dared to emerge. Alex was already up, making coffee. "Sleep well, little cousin?" He grinned. I just shook my head. I didn't tell him what I'd heard, what I'd felt, what I'd seen. He wouldn't believe me. He'd just say I was spooked. But as we packed up our gear, I noticed something. On the damp earth just outside where my head had been in the tent, there was a faint, almost invisible impression. It was perfectly circular, about the size of a small lens. And next to it, a single, tiny, perfectly formed footprint. Too small for a human, too defined for an animal. We hiked out in silence, the beauty of the lake now overshadowed by a lingering sense of unease. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see that tall, slender shadow emerge from the trees. I still don't know what was out there that night, but I know one thing. Lake Serenity isn't so serene after all, and I'll never go camping there again. "Are you sure this is the right way, Maya?" Ben asked, his voice echoing slightly in the damp, cool air. He shivered, pulling his hoodie tighter. "It's getting pretty dark." I consulted the crumpled map again, tracing my finger along the faint lines. "Positive. The old ranger station said there's a perfect clearing just past the Whispering Falls and then a small cave. Great spot for a fire, apparently." My younger brother, Leo, was already ahead of us, his headlamp beam bouncing wildly as he explored a cluster of moss-covered boulders. We were on our annual summer camping trip, but this year we decided to go off the beaten path. No designated campsites, no picnic tables, just raw, untamed wilderness. We'd heard about this particular area, deep in the Blackwood Mountains, known for its ancient forests and hidden geological formations. After another hour of scrambling over roots and ducking under low branches, we finally found it. A small, flat clearing, just big enough for our 2 tents, nestled against a sheer rock face. And there, almost hidden by thick vines, was the mouth of a cave. It was more of a large overhang, really, but the darkness within seemed to stretch endlessly. "Jackpot!" Leo yelled, already dropping his pack and pulling out his headlamp. "Let's check it out." "Hold on, little dude," Ben said, grabbing his arm. "Let's get the tents up first. And the fire." As dusk settled, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, a chill seeped from the cave entrance. We got the fire roaring, its flames a cheerful defiance against the encroaching darkness. The air grew heavy with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. After a dinner of instant noodles, we sat around the fire, the cave mouth a silent, gaping maw behind us. The wind picked up, rustling through the ancient trees, and it carried with it a strange, almost musical sound. A low, mournful hum. "What's that noise?" Leo whispered, his eyes wide. "Just the wind, buddy," I said, though it didn't sound like wind. It was too steady, too resonant. It seemed to be coming from the cave. Ben, ever the pragmatist, grabbed a sturdy branch. Probably just some air currents in there. Caves make weird noises. But the hum grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't a wind chime or a natural phenomenon. It was a sound that felt intentional, like a lament. Then, a new sound joined the hum, a faint, rhythmic scratching, like something dragging itself across rough stone. It was deep within the cave, but the sound seemed to travel effortlessly through the rock, reaching us with chilling clarity. "Okay, that's not wind," Ben muttered, his grip tightening on the branch. "Maybe an animal?" Leo suggested, but his voice was trembling. The scratching grew closer, accompanied by a wet, slithering sound. The hum intensified, becoming a low, guttural chant that seemed to vibrate in our very bones. It was a language, but not one I'd ever heard. It was ancient, alien, and filled with a profound, terrifying hunger. Suddenly, a shadow flickered at the mouth of the cave. It was fleeting, gone before I could properly register it, but it was there. Something large, something that moved with an unnatural fluidity. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Ben nodded, his face pale in the firelight. Leo was huddled against him, his eyes glued to the cave entrance. The chanting grew louder, more frantic. The scratching and slithering sounds were now right at the cave's opening. We could hear heavy, ragged breathing, a sound that was far too large for any animal we knew. Then, a low, guttural growl emanated from the cave, a sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath us. It wasn't an animal growl. It was something far more intelligent, far more menacing. A stench hit us then, thick and cloying. The smell of damp earth, decay, and something else, something metallic and sickly sweet. It was the smell of death. The air in the clearing grew impossibly cold, despite the roaring fire. Our breath plumed in front of us, even as the heat from the flames licked at our faces. A long, pale limb, impossibly thin and jointed, stretched out from the darkness of the cave. It moved slowly, deliberately, its tip reaching towards the fire, as if testing the heat. It was covered in a slick, dark substance that glistened in the firelight. We scrambled backwards, away from the fire, away from the cave. Our hearts hammered in our chests, a frantic drumbeat against the terrifying silence that had fallen, broken only by the creature's ragged breathing. The limb retracted, and then, slowly, a figure began to emerge from the darkness. It was tall, impossibly thin, its skin a pale, sickly gray. Its head was small, almost featureless, with two large, black eyes that seemed to absorb all the light. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, like a puppet on invisible strings. It paused at the edge of the cave, its head tilted, as if listening. The hum started again, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to emanate from the creature itself. Then it took a step towards us. Another, and another. "Run!" Ben screamed, grabbing Leo's arm. We didn't need to be told twice. We scrambled to our feet, abandoning our tents, our gear, everything. We ran blindly into the forest, the sounds of the creature's strange hum and its dragging footsteps echoing behind us. We ran until our lungs burned, until our legs ached, until the first rays of dawn pierced through the canopy. We never looked back. We never went camping in the Blackwood Mountains again. And I still hear that hum sometimes, in the dead of night, a chilling reminder of the echoing cave and the thing that lived within. The sun was already dipping below the tree line, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, when we finally found the spot. "Just a little further," Liam had promised, consulting his phone for the 10th time, despite the rapidly dwindling signal. We were supposed to be at Cedar Creek, a well-known spot, but Liam, ever the adventurer, had decided to take a shortcut down an old, overgrown logging road. "This doesn't look like Cedar Creek, dude," I said, eyeing the dense, dark woods that pressed in on either side of the narrow, rutted path. The trees here were ancient, their branches gnarled and twisted, blocking out most of the remaining light. A thick, unsettling silence hung in the air, broken only by the crunch of our boots on dead leaves. "It's an alternative route," Liam corrected, a little too quickly. "More authentic. Less people." He was right about that. There was no sign of anyone else. No tire tracks, no discarded wrappers, just the faint impression of what had once been a road, now slowly being reclaimed by the forest. We found a small, relatively flat patch of ground off to the side, barely big enough for our two small tents. As we set up camp, the last vestiges of daylight faded, plunging the forest into an inky blackness. The air grew heavy, damp, and strangely still. The usual sounds of the forest, crickets, distant birds, seemed muted, almost absent. "Think we should get a bigger fire going?" I asked, shivering, though it wasn't just from the cold. There was an oppressive feeling here, a sense of being watched, that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Liam, usually fearless, nodded. "Yeah, good idea. This place feels quiet." We managed to get a decent fire blazing, its flickering light pushing back the encroaching shadows. We ate our sandwiches in silence, each of us acutely aware of the vast, unseen forest surrounding us. Later, tucked into my sleeping bag, I tried to read by the dim glow of my headlamp, but my mind kept wandering. Every creak of the trees, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept thinking about the old logging road, and how it felt like we were trespassing on something ancient and forgotten. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic dragging sound. It was coming from the road, slowly, steadily approaching our camp. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag. It sounded like something heavy being pulled, or perhaps someone struggling to walk with a great burden. I held my breath, listening. Liam was silent in his tent next to mine. He must have heard it too. The sound grew louder, closer. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It was too deliberate, too heavy. And it was getting closer to our clearing. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to call out to Liam, but my throat was suddenly dry, constricted by fear. The dragging stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying. It felt like whatever was out there was now standing just beyond the reach of our firelight, listening. Then, a new sound, a low, guttural moan, filled with an unbearable agony. It wasn't human, not entirely. It was too deep, too distorted, like a sound ripped from something ancient and suffering. I heard Liam gasp from his tent. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Yeah," I managed to croak. "What is it?" Before I could answer, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the trees. It was tall, impossibly thin, and seemed to sway slightly, as if struggling to maintain its balance. It moved with a jerky, disjointed motion, like a broken doll. It stepped into the faint glow of our campfire. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a person. It was a figure vaguely human-shaped, but its limbs were elongated, twisted at unnatural angles. Its head was tilted to one side, and where its face should have been, there was only a gaping black void. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just an empty space, and it was dragging something. A heavy, dark sack, leaving a faint, glistening trail on the ground. The sack seemed to pulse faintly, as if something alive, or recently alive, was contained within. The figure paused, its head still tilted, and then that low, guttural moan escaped it again, a sound of profound, endless sorrow. It took another jerky step towards our tents. "Oh my God!" Liam whimpered. I scrambled to unzip my tent, my fingers fumbling with the zipper. Liam was doing the same. We burst out simultaneously, our eyes wide with terror, fixed on the horrifying spectacle before us. The figure stopped, its head snapping up, as if it had finally registered our presence. The empty void of its face seemed to turn towards us, and I felt an icy dread seep into my bones, as if something was reaching into my very soul. It dropped the sack. A sickening thud echoed through the silent clearing. The sack twitched. Then the figure began to move, faster now, its disjointed limbs propelling it towards us with an unnatural speed. It didn't run. It scuttled, like a giant, broken insect. "Run!" I screamed, my voice raw. We didn't hesitate. We bolted into the darkness, away from the fire, away from the figure, away from the old logging road. We ran blindly, crashing through underbrush, tripping over roots, not caring where we were going, only that it was away from that. We ran until the first light of dawn broke through the trees, until our lungs burned and our legs gave out. We never looked back. We never went camping down an old logging road again. And the image of that faceless figure, dragging its pulsing sack, is burned into my nightmares forever. Are you sure this is a good idea, Chloe? Sarah asked, her voice tight with apprehension. She gestured towards the crumbling stone structure half hidden by overgrown bushes. It looks old. That's the point. I grinned, pushing aside a tangle of thorny vines. It's an abandoned homestead. Think of the history. Plus, the map said there's a spring nearby, perfect for camping. We were on a weekend hiking trip, deep in the forgotten corners of the Redwood National Park. I'd found an old, faded map online that showed a pioneer settlement, marked with a faded X far off the main trails. Promised solitude and a glimpse into the past. We finally broke through the dense undergrowth to a small, overgrown clearing. In the center stood the skeletal remains of a cabin, its wooden walls collapsing inwards. And beside it, almost swallowed by moss and ferns, was an old stone well. Its circular opening was dark, a silent void. Creepy, Sarah muttered, but I could see the flicker of curiosity in her eyes. We set up our single tent a safe distance from the cabin and the well, but close enough to feel the weight of their history. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying wood, and something else, something cold and metallic, like old iron. As dusk settled, painting the towering redwoods in shades of deep indigo, a profound silence descended upon the clearing. The usual sounds of the forest seemed to vanish, replaced by an unsettling stillness. We got a small fire going, its flames struggling against the pervasive dampness. Imagine what happened here, I whispered, staring at the cabin. Who lived here? Why did they leave? Sarah shivered. Let's not imagine too much. Just focus on the Esmores. But as the night deepened, the silence grew heavier, more oppressive. I kept glancing at the well, its dark mouth a constant, unsettling presence. Then I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. It was coming from the well. It sounded like a breath, a sigh, a word just out of reach. Did you hear that? I asked Sarah, my voice low. She looked up, her eyes wide. Hear what? A whisper. From the well. She listened intently for a moment. No, just the wind. But there was no wind. The air was perfectly still. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't just one voice, but many, overlapping, murmuring, like a distant, sorrowful chorus. It was too faint to make out words, but the tone was unmistakable. Despair. I felt a chill seep into my bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the night air. It felt like the whispers were seeping into my mind, filling it with a profound sadness. Then, a new sound joined the chorus. Faint, desperate scratching, like fingernails dragging against stone, deep within the well. It was rhythmic, persistent, and filled with an unbearable urgency. Okay, that's not the wind, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. Her face was pale in the firelight. The scratching grew frantic, accompanied by a faint splashing sound, as if something was struggling in water far below. The whispers intensified, becoming a cacophony of anguished cries, rising and falling like a tide of sorrow. Suddenly, a faint, sickly sweet smell wafted from the well. It was the smell of stagnant water, decay, and something else, something metallic and coppery. The smell of old blood. The air around the well grew impossibly cold, a pocket of freezing dread in the otherwise still night. Our breath plumed in front of us, even as the fire crackled nearby. A faint, shimmering light began to emanate from the mouth of the well. It was a pale, sickly green, pulsating faintly, casting an eerie glow on the surrounding trees. Then, a hand emerged from the darkness of the well. It was skeletal, impossibly thin, its skin a translucent, sickly white. Water dripped from its bony fingers, reflecting the strange green light. It slowly, agonizingly, gripped the moss-covered stones of the well's edge, its knuckles white with effort. We scrambled backwards, away from the fire, away from the well. Our hearts hammered in our chests, a frantic drumbeat against the terrifying silence that had fallen, broken only by the frantic scratching and the mournful whispers. Another hand emerged, then a shoulder, then a head. It was a woman, or what was left of one. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow, staring blankly ahead. Her hair, long and matted, clung to her skull. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, and water streamed from it, mingling with the green light. She slowly, painfully, began to pull herself from the well, her ancient, waterlogged clothes clinging to her skeletal frame. The whispers grew to a deafening shriek, a chorus of agony that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the night. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing Sarah's arm. We didn't need to be told twice. We burst from the clearing, abandoning our tent, our gear, everything. We ran blindly into the darkness of the redwoods, the terrifying shriek of the well-woman echoing behind us, mingling with the mournful whispers of countless unseen voices. We ran until our lungs burned, until our legs ached, until the first rays of dawn pierced through the dense canopy. We never looked back. We never went camping near forgotten homesteads again. And I still hear those whispers sometimes, in the dead of night, a chilling reminder of the well and the tormented souls trapped within. "This is it," Jake announced, dropping his pack with a grunt. "The perfect spot. No one around for miles." He gestured to the small, circular clearing nestled deep within the Redwood Creek wilderness. The trees here were so tall and dense that the sunlight barely filtered through, creating a perpetual twilight. I looked around, a shiver running down my spine. It was certainly isolated. Too isolated, maybe. The air was still, heavy, and strangely devoid of sound. No birds chirping, no rustling leaves, not even the buzz of insects. Just an unnerving, profound silence. "It's quiet," I said, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, that's the beauty of it," Jake replied, already pulling out his tent. Total peace and quiet. We were on a 3-day backpacking trip, seeking solitude and a break from the constant noise of the city. We'd hiked for hours, following a barely discernible deer trail, until we stumbled upon this clearing. It felt ancient, untouched, as if no human had set foot here in centuries. As we set up our tents and gathered firewood, the silence deepened, pressing in on us. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was an active silence, a heavy blanket that seemed to absorb all noise, even our own voices. Our whispers seemed to die almost instantly, swallowed by the oppressive stillness. We managed to get a small fire going, its flames flickering weakly in the gloom. The smoke rose straight up, undisturbed by any breeze. We ate our dinner in hushed tones, each of us acutely aware of the unnatural quiet. Later, tucked into my sleeping bag, I found myself wide awake, staring at the tent ceiling. The silence was deafening, a constant pressure on my eardrums. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic, in the stillness. Then, a new sensation, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration. It was coming from the ground beneath me, a low, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to resonate through the earth itself. It was too subtle to be a tremor, too regular to be natural. I held my breath, listening. The vibration grew stronger, a slow, steady pulse that seemed to match the frantic beat of my own heart. It felt like something vast and powerful was stirring beneath the earth. I nudged Jake's tent with my foot. "Jake," I whispered, my voice barely a sound. No response. I nudged him again, harder. Still nothing. He was usually a light sleeper. Panic began to set in. I unzipped my tent flap just a crack, peering out into the gloom. The fire had died down to a few glowing embers, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and stretch in the eerie silence. The vibration intensified, becoming a deep, resonant hum that seemed to fill the entire clearing. The trees around us, impossibly tall and still, seemed to lean inwards, their branches forming a dark, suffocating canopy. Then I saw them. Shadows. Not the dancing shadows cast by the fire, but deeper, darker shapes, moving slowly, deliberately, at the very edge of the clearing. They were tall, slender, and seemed to glide rather than walk. They were almost indistinguishable from the surrounding darkness, but I knew they were there. They were circling us. My breath hitched in my throat. I could feel an intense, chilling cold emanating from them, a cold that seeped into my bones. The silent hum grew louder, a low, guttural thrum that seemed to vibrate in my very skull. I tried to call out to Jake again, but no sound escaped my lips. My throat was constricted, as if an invisible hand was squeezing it tight. It was the silence. It wasn't just an absence of sound. It was an active force, stealing my voice, suffocating me. The shadows drew closer, their movements slow and deliberate. I could feel their presence, a crushing weight of unseen eyes. They were not human. They were not animal. They were something else entirely. Something ancient, something that belonged to this silent, forgotten place. One of the shadows paused directly in front of Jake's tent. I watched in horror as a faint, shimmering outline began to form within the darkness, like a ripple in water. It was vaguely humanoid, but elongated, distorted, its limbs too long, its head too small. A low, resonant thump echoed through the clearing, vibrating through the ground. It sounded like something heavy falling, or perhaps something being dropped. Then, the shimmering outline dissolved back into the darkness. The shadow glided away, rejoining the others as they continued their slow, silent circle around our camp. I lay there, paralyzed by fear, until the first faint light of dawn began to break through the dense canopy. As the light grew stronger, the oppressive silence slowly lifted, and the faint sounds of the forest began to return. I scrambled out of my tent, my body stiff with terror. Jake's tent was still zipped. I called his name, my voice hoarse. No answer. I unzipped his tent. It was empty. His sleeping bag was still there, neatly rolled, his backpack untouched. But Jake was gone. No sign of a struggle, no footprints leading away. Just an empty tent in a silent clearing. I ran. I didn't pack anything. I just ran blindly through the forest, following the faint trail back the way we came. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, until I heard the distant hum of traffic, until I was back among the sounds of the living world. I never went back to the Redwood Creek wilderness, and I still hear that silent hum sometimes, in the dead of night, a chilling reminder of the clearing and the things that stole Jake in the profound, suffocating silence. "Are you sure this is the right trail, Sam?" Chloe asked, her voice laced with doubt. She squinted at the faded, almost invisible markers on the ancient trees. "It looks like no one's been on this path in years." "That's the point," I declared, pushing aside a thick curtain of spiderwebs. "It's the forgotten trail. Supposedly leads to a hidden waterfall. Total adventure." We were deep in the Smoky Hollow State Park, a place known for its vast, sprawling forests and countless hiking paths. But the forgotten trail was different. It wasn't on any recent maps, only whispered about by old-timers who claimed it led to places best left undisturbed. The trail was barely a path, overgrown with thorny bushes and fallen logs. The trees here were ancient, their branches intertwined overhead, forming a dense, perpetual canopy that blocked out most of the sun. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, decaying leaves, and a faint, unsettling sweetness, like rotting fruit. After hours of pushing through the dense undergrowth, we finally found a small, flat clearing. It was surrounded by impossibly tall, gnarled trees, their twisted branches reaching like skeletal fingers towards the perpetually dim sky. There was no sign of the promised waterfall, just a profound, oppressive silence. "Well, this is rustic," Chloe muttered, her eyes scanning the dark woods around us. We set up our tents quickly, the silence amplifying every rustle of nylon, every snap of a twig. The air grew colder as dusk settled, and the gloom deepened, making the trees seem to press in on us. We managed to get a small fire going, its flickering light a desperate beacon against the encroaching darkness. We ate our cold sandwiches in hushed tones, the silence of the forest unnerving us both. It wasn't just quiet, It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting. Later, tucked into my sleeping bag, I tried to sleep, but my mind raced. The silence was too heavy, too complete. I kept thinking about the old stories I'd heard about the forgotten trail, tales of hikers who vanished without a trace, of strange lights in the woods, of whispers carried on the wind. Then I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound. It was coming from the trees, slowly, steadily approaching our camp. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It sounded like something with long, sharp claws dragging itself across rough bark. I held my breath, listening. Chloe was silent in her tent next to mine. She must have heard it too. The sound grew louder, closer. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It was too deliberate, too rhythmic. And it was getting closer to our clearing. Scritch, scritch, scritch. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to call out to Chloe, but my throat was suddenly dry, constricted by fear. The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying. It felt like whatever was out there was now standing just beyond the reach of our firelight, listening. Then, a new sound. A low, wet chuckle. It was deep, guttural, and filled with a chilling amusement. It was definitely not human. It was too raspy, too ancient, like something that hadn't laughed in a very, very long time. I heard Chloe whimper from her tent. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yeah," I managed to croak. "What is it?" Before I could answer, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the trees. It was huge, hulking, and seemed to sway slightly, as if it was barely contained by the surrounding foliage. It moved with a slow, deliberate shuffle, its movements heavy and ponderous. It stepped into the faint glow of our campfire. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't an animal. It was a creature vaguely ape-like, but far too large, far too grotesque. Its skin was gnarled and covered in what looked like thick, matted fur, but it moved with an unnatural stiffness, like wood. Its limbs were thick and powerful, ending in long, clawed hands that scraped against the ground. Its head was large, almost featureless, but I could make out two glowing, yellow eyes that burned in the darkness. And then a wide, gaping maw, filled with rows of jagged, yellowed teeth. The wet chuckle escaped it again, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. It paused, its glowing eyes fixed on our tents, and then that sickly sweet smell intensified, becoming overpowering, cloying. It was the smell of decay, of something ancient and foul. It took another slow, shuffling step towards our tents. "Oh my God!" Chloe whimpered. I scrambled to unzip my tent, my fingers fumbling with the zipper. Chloe was doing the same. We burst out simultaneously, our eyes wide with terror, fixed on the horrifying spectacle before us. The creature stopped, its head tilting, as if assessing us. The glowing yellow eyes seemed to bore into my soul, and I felt an icy dread seep into my bones, as if something was reaching into my very being. Then it raised one of its massive, clawed hands. Slowly, deliberately, it pointed a long, gnarled finger at us. And then, a voice, deep and resonant, filled the clearing. It wasn't the wet chuckle, but a voice that seemed to rumble from the very earth itself. "You are lost." The words were drawn out, ancient, and filled with a profound, terrifying finality. "Run!" I screamed, my voice raw. We didn't hesitate. We bolted into the darkness, away from the fire, away from the creature, away from the forgotten trail. We ran blindly, crashing through underbrush, tripping over roots, not caring where we were going, only that it was away from that. We ran until the first light of dawn broke through the trees, until our lungs burned and our legs gave out. We never looked back. We never went camping on the forgotten trail again. And the image of that hulking creature, its glowing yellow eyes and its chilling voice, is burned into my nightmares forever.